Okay, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to week 5 of Wellness Tuesdays. We're here as usual with Sh Yassir Fazaga. Just to recap, so far we've covered 4 topics in the last 4 weeks. Our first class was on anxiety and depression. Second was dealing with moods at home. Third is stress management, and the one last week was on self-care. So after feedback from the community and taking in input from everyone watching these webinars, the next 4 webinars were based on what you all wanted to hear. So in the next 4 weeks, inshallah, we'll be covering what every parent needs to know about drug addiction, which is our topic for today, schizophrenia and the concept of jinn on mental health, dealing with society's current discord and chaos while advocating for change and justice. And then the last one is facing judgment from the community and how to best deal with this. Just as a reminder to everyone, Sheikh Yassir is still providing emotional wellness consults, and that can be accessed through the MAPS MCRC Clinic's online booking platform. As usual, I'm going to be posting links on both Zoom and on Facebook for anyone to ask questions for Sheikh Yassir anonymously at the end. As usual, we will be dedicating the last 15 minutes to 20 minutes to answering all of your questions, inshallah. All right, Sheikh Yassir, I'm going to turn it to you.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. How are you doing?
Me?
Yes.
Alhamdulillah, doing well.
Good. Hey, how did the testing go last time? Remember how you had the COVID testing for the community last weekend, I believe?
Yeah, it actually went really well. We had a huge turnout. We tested around 80 people through the community.
80 people, 80.
Yeah, 80. Yeah, but unfortunately, because so many people are being tested right now, actually, it's a good thing. Because so many people in the state and around the country are being tested right now, all of the labs are backed up. So it's just going to take a little longer to get results. But mashallah, we were able to test 80 people.
MashaAllah. So it was the nose, right?
Yeah, it went in the nose.
I hear, is it painful? I heard people complain that it might have been.
Yeah, it usually just makes your eyes water up. But everyone has a different pain tolerance. So okay. For some people, it's more painful than others.
Okay. Well, I hope, inshallah, all the tests come back negative, inshallah, Rabbil Alameen, for the people who've been tested. And I wish you and all of our loved ones that we all be healthy and we all be well, inshallah, Ya Rabbil Alameen. So our topic for the evening has to do with drugs. And even though we're entitling it as to what every parent needs to know, remember that drug abuse and drug misuse and drug use does not have any age barriers or ethnic barriers or cultural or religious barriers. So when we address these topics, we're just being honest to ourselves, and we're just saying that, look, this is potentially an issue that is happening within our community. And like we said, and I love to repeat this, a good community is not a trouble-free community. A good community is a community that has troubles and has problems, but both has the humility to acknowledge and has the courage to seek solutions. And this is part of what we are doing. And remember, it is about fighting the stigma, what we like to do, educate the public, support those who may be going through some of these difficulties, and also we want to promote and encourage policies that would have a good impact on the people who may be suffering from this. All right, so inshallah, we will begin. I have a PowerPoint presentation today. We will begin with our presentation today, inshallah, and we will be talking about drugs. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to identify, when we use the word drugs, what is it that we are talking about? It is any substance, with the exception of food and water, which when taken into the body alters the body's function, either physically and or psychologically. They may be legal or they may be illegal. And that is why in Arabic, subhanAllah, and in the language of the Quran uses this very general term, and that is khamr. And khamr, even though we directly think that it is alcohol, but it is anything that alters the function of the mind is referred to as khamr. And in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ taught us that Al-Khamr Ummul Kabair. It is the mother of all evil. And when we're talking about the drugs having an impact on us physically and or psychologically, because it impacts the central nervous system, it alters our mood, thinking, and behavior, as we will see. When we think of drugs, especially psychoactive drugs, they can be divided into three different categories: depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. And we will see what is going on. So depressants are the type of drugs that are taken, and when they slow our central nervous system, as we will see what we mean by this. And stimulants, they do the opposite. They speed it up. And the hallucinogens, these are the type of drugs that alters our perception of reality. And we will see the examples for each and every one of these. So depressants would be like alcohol. They will be like some of the prescriptions, drugs or heroin. And these are drugs, when taken, it slows us down. And you see that when we say that it slows us down, you're talking about people movement. They become very sluggish. You see a person who is drunk, the way that they speak very slowly, difficulty opening their eyes or just keeping their composure or balance, because it's just slowing the central nervous system down. Now, the other one, which we said is the stimulants, these are the ones that stimulate and speed up the body's function. We're talking about cocaine, we're talking about meth, we're talking about some of the prescription stimulants. And then there are hallucinogens, and these are the ones that alter our perception of reality. And these would be like ecstasy and mushrooms and LSD. And inshallah, my hope is that we as parents, we become informed as to what is going on, so that we are aware of the different symptoms. And inshallah, we may never, Ya Rabbil Alameen, we never experience these things, but we do want to become aware of what is going on. Remember, we said that drugs may be legal and illegal. At this point, alcohol and marijuana remain to be the highest used substance for teenagers. Okay, especially with marijuana. Marijuana is extremely popular, and we will talk more about marijuana, inshallah. But the fact that it is legal does not mean much to us, because yeah, it may be legal, but it is still haram, forbidden in our deen. So, but making it legal, what it does is that accessibility, and most of the time affordability, actually makes them very easy and attainable, and that's why they are very popular amongst the teenagers. Even though they are very popular amongst teenagers, but we are also keeping track of what is trending and becoming increasingly popular with our youth population. Mainly, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at vaping, we are looking at opioids, we are looking at synthetic drugs. So I'll give you an example, marijuana. So there are many different components of marijuana, and usually people take marijuana for the THC, and there is of course the CBD. So CBD is the depressant and THC is the stimulant. And now natural marijuana would have about 80% CBD, that would be the depressant, and 20% will be the THC, which is the stimulant. Nowadays, with the engineering, what can happen is that you can get 80% of THC and 20% of the CBD. So what we're seeing is that we're seeing a lot of the synthetic drugs. One drug that is also really, really popular is this drug called fentanyl. Fentanyl is a drug that is used to put big animals down in the zoo. For example, an elephant, a big hippo. And they're used to this. And now what we're seeing here is that we're seeing this also trending amongst the youth, amongst the teenagers. And here is the crazy thing. I just want you to see how deadly and lethal this is. Compared to a penny, now this is the whole penny. If you can see this little white powder on this side, on the right hand of the penny next to the 2012, this much of it can actually kill a human being. Like, this is how lethal this drug is. And yet it is becoming popular amongst teenagers. And now what we have is we're just going to make a distinction. So we're going to talk about drug use, drug misuse, and drug abuse. When we're talking about drug use, we're talking about using drug in the manner that it has been intended for, and not altered in any way, shape, or manner, not in frequency and not in dosage. We would say that this is proper use of drugs. Now, we're talking, of course, about prescription drugs. Drug misuse is what we say. Uh, Drug misuse would be this idea of, sorry, drug misuse would be this idea of using a drug for a purpose which it was not intended for, or by somebody that it was not prescribed to, or using it in wrong dosages. Now, parents, wallahi, this is really, really important. So what would happen? Well, sometimes, some of us are going through some difficulties. So for example, I had a surgery. I was given Vicodin. I didn't use the Vicodin, but the Vicodin was there. Every time I come, I see that the pills are, they're not as many as I left. So somebody else must be using the Vicodin that was prescribed for me, but now somebody else is using it. Or maybe I was going through some difficulty and I had anxiety and I have some Zoloft or Xanax. And now all of a sudden I haven't been using it because the doctor said use it when you need to. But then I see that my pills are being missing. So that would be a drug misuse because it's being used by somebody other than the person that it was intended for or prescribed to. So that would be drug misuse. Or the doctor would say, you know what? Take one pill a day, but you cannot take more than two in any given 24-hour period. People would start piling them up, just popping them in, 3 and 4, and say, wait a minute. So now we are misusing it in a sense that in a dosage other than what we were told. Drug abuse. Remember, we're talking about this idea of, just our relationship with drugs. So we're saying that it can be used, it can be misused, and now we're talking about it can be abused. Excessive and intentional misuse of drug. So it's beyond just misusing it. Now it is excessive and intentional. At that point, we're saying that this person is not just misusing, this person is actually abusing drugs. When we say drugs, we're talking about 5 different types. We're talking about prescriptions, because some of these drugs that may be given to us, they can also be stimulants, they can cause hallucinogens, or they can also be what we said, depressants. But nevertheless, the doctor gave it to us because they believe that it will help us. So prescription drugs, they need a doctor to write us prescription, or sometimes over the counter. These are the ones that we can buy at the drugstore or the convenience store without really a note from the doctor. Now remember, both of these can actually be misused or abused. Give you an example, like I said, with the Vicodin, with the Xanax, somebody else that was not intended for, or in dosages that the doctor has not indicated. Over the counter, what we see people saying that, I ask my clients, how's your sleep? And people would say, I'm sorry, but Sheikh, I try to sleep on my own, but I cannot. But the only way that I can sleep at night is I take NyQuil. Or there are some cough medications. They've got some depressant element in them. And people don't have cough, but they would use it anyway because it helps them sleep. Now, if you do this as an exception, it's one thing, but to become dependent on it, that would be a problem. The fact that it is over the counter, we would still say that you are misusing, potentially abusing over the counter drugs as well, which is very, very unhealthy. Sometimes the drugs can be recreational, such as cocaine, marijuana, or meth. And these are used without medical justification, but they are used for the psychoeffective effects that takes place after using it. And this is really, really problematic, okay? because and I love the Quranic description here. You know, the Quran, subhanallah, and I love to repeat this. I said the Quran is a very brave book that is read by a lot of cowards. That would be us. The Quran is not afraid of addressing these issues, forcing us to have a dialogue about these issues. And I love the way that the Quran speaks about intoxicants and gambling, and I love the Quranic approach to it. So in the Quran it says, يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر قل فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما. They asked you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the people around you, they inquire about intoxicants and gambling. Say, let the people know that in them there is a great sin and some benefits to people. However, the sin in them outweighs the benefit that is in them. And what the Quran is doing is that the Quran is letting us know that some of these things may really have some benefits in them. Marijuana really does have some benefits in them. Ask people who are taking medication or they're going through their chemotherapy or radiation. They get a lot of nausea. They cannot really take medication because it's the medication that is causing the nausea. So what happens is that they smoke marijuana, the nausea goes away. Some neurological disorders, people would be shaken. The minute they start smoking marijuana, the shaking goes away. People who have joint pain, they take the medication or they take the marijuana, it goes away. People who are suffering from anxiety, they smoke the marijuana, and then guess what? The anxiety goes away temporarily. So the Quran is telling us, be open to the idea that some of these drugs, they may really have benefits in them. So we're not going to argue that. But what the Quran is telling us is, look, the sin in them, the evil in them outweighs the benefits that they may give you. In other words, if your son, your daughter, I'm sorry, I'm saying son or daughter, if anybody argues with you about the benefits of marijuana, please do not argue back that marijuana is not beneficial. Marijuana is beneficial per the teachings of the Quran. However, the Quran does not stop there. The Quran says the sin, the evil in them outweighs the benefit that they offer you. So if somebody is arguing with us about the benefits of marijuana, I listen to them and I give them even more benefits to that. So what is the sin in them? I'll give you an example. So marijuana really does make anxiety go away. But the key word here is it makes anxiety go away temporarily. Meaning what? It will make the anxiety go away, but then the anxiety will come back. But here is the problem. When the anxiety comes back, it comes back with more intensity, which means now in order to fight the more intense anxiety that just came to me, I either have to smoke more frequently or I have to smoke in higher quantity. Now that takes care of the anxiety. It goes away for a while. But then when it comes back with more intensity. Now what do? I have to, again, up my either frequency or my dosage. It will take care of it temporarily. When it comes back, it will come back with more intensity, and eventually we have the worst type of dependency. Remember, the worst type of dependency is emotional dependency. When we become emotionally dependent on someone or something, what happens is that we have surrendered a lot of that power away. So now what we're seeing here is that people who take these medications, recreational or meth or some of these things, initially they started as medicine, without any medical justification for the purpose of the psychoactive effects that it will have on us, okay? And unfortunately, it is taken with the belief that it is not habit forming or it is not addictive. That can be the Vicodin or the OxyContin or anything else. So these would be recreational. Another one would be illicit. There is really no legal medical use for it. And then there is also commercial preparations, such as when you go to Home Depot, for example, They would have the spray paint, it will be locked. They will check your ID, make sure that you're over 21. Unfortunately, in some poorer areas, what you will see kids walking around, there is a towel in their hand, they put some gas in it, and they're just walking around smelling it, or sometimes people using glue in order to do that. And it would have that impact. And again, that would be a type of drug. Like we said with the OTC, the over-the-counter medication, when taken in higher dosage and longer for the recommended period of time, then what happens is that it can impact our health negatively, and also it can lead to addiction. And like I said, people just becoming so dependent on sleep medication, which is very, very unhealthy. Okay, like I said, the sleep aid, the cold medication, and the diet pills, unfortunately. And these are some of the examples, and I'm just going through them very quickly so that we can get as much information as possible here. Okay, prescription drug abuse, man, this is at an all-time high. We are talking about and you can see some of the statistic here, that most abused drugs next to alcohol and marijuana. These are the prescription drugs. 6.2% of the population, older than age 12, abuse prescription drugs in past year. That is a lot. 6% of the population, that is a lot of people, especially pain medication, Vicodin and codeine being just amongst the most popular ones. There's actually a nice study about the history of this. Back in the 1990s, doctors became very liberal. Sorry if any doctor is listening out there. With the pain medication, just people were just, given a lot of these pain medications, and they just took them. It could be the depressants or the stimulants with medications. Also, what's happening nowadays amongst college students, Adderall is becoming very popular. It is medication that is given to people with ADHD or ADD. And what happens is that helps people focus. So now these kids are under a lot of pressure, especially during exam time. And what they do is that they don't have ADD, they don't have ADHD, but what's going on is that they need to be up at night and they need to focus so that they can grasp the information, because they need to get good grades. And what we see them doing is that they're popping this, Adderall or Ritalin medication that would help them, be stimulated and focus. It was intended for the people who need it, even though it's prescription, but now it is either misused or abused by those to whom it was not intended, or at least in their case, there was no medical justification for them to be using it. Okay, why are the youth using drugs? And by the way, the month of June, July, and August are really, really dangerous, because that is when you have got a lot of free time, a lot of boredom, and the look for excitement. And we will see, inshallah, some of the risk factors. They may answer these questions. When we speak about factors, we are talking about what are some things when present, they would actually have they would make the likelihood of that person more likely to start using drugs. And we have 4 of them: social, psychological, environmental, and others. The social risk factors are when we see people hanging out with peer groups who use drugs. And I tell you, subhanAllah, I love our deen, because in our deen, the idea of who your friends are is extremely important. And as we speak about these risk factors, please, as parents, we've got to remember, we need to be aware of who are our children's friends. Remember, this is our God-given right. We have to know who are our kids hanging around with. And the tendency is that when we hang around with people who use drugs, 2 things happen. We either become more inclined towards using it, or the least that can happen is we become desensitized to something like this. Pressure from peers. And last time I asked our, we had a similar class, and I asked and I said, when does most peer pressure take place? Remember, we're always under pressure from our peers, even us as adults. But ages 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, these are like the most pressure that is taking place. And the best time to start talking about specifically about marijuana and drugs to your kids would be at the end of elementary school and the beginning of middle school. Middle school happens to be that age when the kids are first exposed to the smoking of marijuana. And subhanAllah, that just really, really is insane. That the kids are just barely finishing elementary school. And the talk that I need to have with them is, you know, we need to start talking about drugs. We need to start talking about sex. We need to start talking about pornography. And sometimes parents tell me and say, look, man, I don't want my kids to lose their innocence. And I say, and I agree with you, but let's differentiate innocence and ignorance. We want our kids to be innocent. We just do not want to be our kids to be stupid. We don't want them to be gullible. We do not want them to be unaware. They can still be innocent and educated, innocent and enlightened, innocent and empowered. Also, the attitude towards drugs, thinking that everyone is doing it. So our kids would be saying like, Mom, Dad, everybody at school does it. No, say it's not really everybody. When you think that everybody is doing it, then the likelihood increases. We say, no, some people are doing it, but not everybody is doing it. And even if everybody is doing it, that does not make it right. And like we said, excessive free time and boredom, or the need to fit in and not be rejected by the peers. And please do not undermine our kids when they really do not want to be rejected by their peers, because a sense of belonging is really important at this age. Or sometimes they just don't have good coping skills. I don't know what to do with my pressure. I don't know what to do with the stress. I don't know what to do with peer pressure. So what happens is that we give in. So we want to be able to speak to our kids and make sure that they have these good coping skills. Very quickly, psychological risk factors. So social risk factors are the environment around us, the people around us. Psychological is just me as an individual. Attitudes and beliefs about drugs. You have got to love our deen. Wallahi, you have to love this deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, Islam puts a barrier between you and intoxicants. Subhanallah, absolutely crazy. So what happens? You can't consume it. You can't serve it. You can't sell it. You can't deliver it. You cannot be in the vicinity where it is consumed. If you are walking in the grocery store and if both sides of the aisle are alcoholic beverages, you do not walk in between, because Islam does not say do not drink. Islam says do not even come close to it. So what it does is that it just creates this barrier between you and alcohol, giving it the worst name. It is the mother of all evil, as the Prophet ﷺ would tell us. Personal values, such as the idea Allah said it was haram, lacking self-confidence. And a lot of people would say, look, I am just always tense and I'm just always afraid. But then the minute I smoke, I feel empowered. I feel this and I feel that. Curiosity to use drugs. And remember, sometimes people would be hearing a talk like this and they would say, come on, man, you know what? This is dangerous knowledge. And I say, please remember, knowledge was never dangerous. Ignorance and unresolved curiosity is actually the biggest problem that we have. Empowering people with these types of talks is not the problem. Ignorance and unresolved curiosity, I believe, is the biggest problem. High stress. Please appreciate that young people are also stressed. We put stress on them. The teachers put stress on them. The school puts stress on them. Their friends put stress on them. The media, the social media, and you just name it. Fortunately, sometimes people are suffering from depression and anxiety and they don't know what to do. So they self-medicate on these types of drugs. Or unfortunately, when people don't think that drugs are that dangerous, or they lack knowledge about the impact of drugs. Very quickly. Environmental risk factors. So we spoke about the people around the person themselves, and then environmental risk factors as far as where I am. So what happens is I live in an area where it's very easy to access drugs and they're very available. I remember I asked one of our youth group and I said, how much money do you need and how much time do you need to get drugs right now if you wanted to? He said, I need $20. If I have a car, 3 minutes. If I need to walk, 20 minutes. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I know where it is sold. I'll just go to their house, knock on the door, hand them the money, they will give me my joint, they will give me my marijuana. And it's no longer poor neighborhoods, it's anywhere nowadays, and especially with the some of the states where marijuana is legal, the dispensaries are all over the place. Alcohol is all over the place. Crime, violence in that neighborhood, because crime and violence, they create a lot of stress and anxiety, and sometimes the only way to cope, they think some of these people, is by just being high or just forgetting about it. Community norms. You live in a community where everybody just does it. You know, we are at the park, and you know what? Every time before sunset, you see a lot of people there, and everybody is just smoking their joint. That becomes a community norm. Unfortunately, chaotic family life. And that is, our house is never peaceful. I just want to get out of that place. And I go, and you know what? Home is no longer very attractive. So what I do is I go outside, and then outside I am exposed to these things. Poor adult role models. Maybe dad does it, maybe mom does it, maybe uncles, aunts, and people around me, they do it. And unfortunately, I don't have an adult that tells me that this is wrong. Lacking respect for authority and the law, and constantly wanting to break the law, that may also be a factor as well. Other risk factors, there is definitely a gene component possibly there, having a biological family member who is drug dependent, and and that may be passed on us, or just that makes it available around us. Traumatic experience that have not been dealt with, not doing well in school, feeling like a failure, no boundaries or rules to follow. Everything is just so very open. Or unfortunately, people who start using drugs at a very early age, unfortunately, their chances of becoming dependent on it are much higher than the people who start using it at an older age. Now, this is really important, people. The number of risk factors present is a more powerful predictor of problem behavior than the specific risk factors themselves. So the more of the risk factors that we have, you know, the better we are able to predict whether this is happening or not. So the fact that you just have chaotic family life on itself, but you have chaotic family life along with availability, along with poor coping mechanism, along with the absence of a good adult role model, along with anxiety, along with failing at school. Now, the more we have, you know what, the more chances there are. And some factors may be more powerful than others at certain stages of people's lives. You know what? My parents got divorced when I was getting the bad grades. So at that point, the chaotic family life, when that was happening, that may be more powerful than others because of what was happening at that specific time, for examples. I think, inshallah, I'm making the point clear, and that is, the more of these risk factors that we have, the more likely that this is going to be taking place. Now, these are protective factors that we must absolutely have, okay? Hanging out with people, also almost like be the opposite of what we said earlier. Hanging out with a peer group that does not use drugs, that looks down upon drugs. And that's why I say, look, we've got to teach our kids that part of self-respect is choosing the company that they hang around with. Good coping skills, anger management skills, and stress management skills. You know what does my child do when they feel angry? What have I taught them? What have we done as a family? When they believe that not everybody is doing it, the smart kids at class, you know, the good kids in the school, the practicing Muslim kids, nobody is doing this. So the idea that not everybody is doing it, okay? The less unstructured time that they have, there is a lot of free time, a lot of boredom. And unfortunately, nowadays with COVID, these things are becoming difficult. And also very important is ability to talk to family and adults openly about dangers of drug use. You know, people are just not afraid. Remember, we don't want to be lecturing about this all the time, but we want to make sure that we create a safe space where we can openly talk about these things. Inshallah, I'll show you some things that I do. Psychological protective factors, high self-confidence. Subhanallah, they say that kids who have been given the ability to say no at home, they have a very good chance to also say no outside, meaning that, when appropriate and the parents are taking opinions, and it's okay for my child to say no. I'm teaching that they have a voice, and their voice is no, something that cannot be forced upon them. And we do this when appropriate. And when their no is respected and heard, they believe that their no will make a difference. So this idea of high self-confidence, that my no actually means something to me per the approval of my parents when I did it at home. Good coping skills, attitudes and beliefs about drugs, that they are dangerous, that they are haram, that they are stupid, that you really do not need to fulfill your curiosity about these things, making sure that their sense of personal values is always high, and having good stress management skills. Environmental factors, strong family relationships. And please remember, sometimes we may even have a strong family relationship, and yet our kids may choose to do something like this. Please remember that this is not about making parents feel guilty. We can have all these things, and yet our kids make these poor choices. But what we want to do is that we want to increase their ability to make the better choice. So what do we do? Strong family relations, positive adult role model, community norm. Most people in the community do not use drugs. When we go to the masjid, people don't do that. Some masjid goers do, but the majority of the people do not really do that. Clear boundaries and rules. These are not places that we go to. These are not people that we hang around to. Community involvement, doing something that is where we contribute positively to the family. Having respect for authority and the law, that also includes the halal and haram, the legal and the illegal. Other protective factors, a kid who is successful in school, having goals and plans to reach them. They know what it is that they want. Success in other activities, they're good soccer players, they're in the football team, they are in this team, or, she's doing this after school and he's doing that after school, successful in other activities. Strong religious convictions. And that's what we mean by, this idea of haram. And like I said, the attitude that Islam builds around alcohol and intoxicants is just absolutely beautiful and extremely impressive. Practicing resistance skills. Speaking about the strong religious convictions, I know Muslims, subhanallah, who have lived, up to 70, 80, 90 years old, said they've never touched alcohol, they've never smelled alcohol, they've never seen alcohol, they've never even, tempted to do that. So you know what? We say, why is that? Say, strong religious convictions, okay? Practicing resistance skills. I just say no. No means no, and so on. Who is at risk? This is really important. Entering middle school. That is unbelievably crucial. Ages 11 and 13. And like I said, subhanAllah, you would think that this is the age where my kids are still innocent. But remember this, the minute they finish elementary school, 6th grade, you need to start having this conversation with your children. And I know, we would still want to think that they are still young, but when they go there, we want to be the first to empower them with the proper knowledge about these things. What is going on at this age? Remember, we said that at this age, peer pressure is the highest. A sense of belonging is really, really strong. They're going through puberty. There are a lot of changes that are taking place. They can be confused. They have their mood swings. They have this unresolved curiosity. So they are at the highest risk. Remember the other day, a sister told me that her son was in the 6th grade when he was offered marijuana. Same thing with high schoolers. High schoolers, this is when they're thinking that I am becoming my own man, my own woman. I am no longer, I just want to be my own person. They're having this individuation. Senior year within high school is even, there is more pressure to start trying to do things, especially after school hours, especially parties at friends' house. because in these parties, there is accessibility to all kind of things, and there is that group pressure that is taking place, and then there is the influence of friends. And that is why it's really important that you know who your children's friends are. Okay. Unfortunately, romantic relationships, when people fall in love, as they say, love is blind. And here we're acknowledging these things. We're not necessarily encouraging them. Sometimes people go to school and they form romantic relationships. Remember, we're not approving of these things, but we're saying that, look, this is the reality of it. People go into these relationships, and per the pressure by these relationships, they may start doing these things because they have been invited to do so. And then the influence of friends, as we have said earlier. What circumstances increase the risk? Family disruption, divorce, frequent moves, family problems, death, trauma, a lot of yelling, fighting, domestic violence that is taking place. They would actually, intensify the risk that is actually taking place there. They would increase that risk. Okay. Social, developmental, behavioral, mental health problems that can also increase that. That would be the depression and the boredom, eating disorders. And I believe that we will have, inshallah, a lecture on the eating disorder and all these things, learning disability, stress, sexual orientation. Some of our kids are confused about this. And inshallah, we will have a lecture on sex and sexuality from an Islamic perspective. And, it's spending money. Just a lot of these things, they can really lead to that. Very quickly, and this part is really important. So what is it about teens? The prefrontal cortex. This is developing until the age of 25. Now, what happens is that you start using drugs. You start using drugs before that age. And what happens is that the brain is still under construction at that point, which means that at this point, the brain for the kids is relying more on the impulse and emotion rather than the rational decision making, especially when it is under stress or under other influences. And now imagine that on top of this, you also take drugs, or because of the impulse, and you're not thinking rationally, you end up taking drugs. That is why teenagers are at a higher risk, because they still have not really fully developed that ability of being rational all the time. Okay. Now here's what's going on. These are the dangers of what happens when you misuse or abuse drugs, be it the over-the-counter or the prescription. It can lead to death. It can lead to seizures, decreased heart rate. We're talking about some of these stimulants, especially the meth, and it can cause all of this. I just want to show you something, inshallah. Don't mean to scare people, but I just want people to become aware of what happens. These are images of, and I apologize if some of you find these images to be offensive. I mean, they are bad, but I think it's essential that we know them. So this is what we call a meth mouth. Okay, these are people who've been using meth, and what we see happening here is that this is what's going on with their teeth, and their teeth become this way for four reasons. Number one, meth is acidic, which is going to influence the mouth badly. It causes the mouth to be dry, and what that does is that there is less saliva that fights the bacteria. And then also, number three, you've got this idea of one of the consequences of using meth is that people start craving for sugary drinks. And of course, because people are high, there is less care that is devoted to taking care of yourself. And as a result, you end up having a mouth that looks like this. Oh, and also what happens is at night, there is a lot of anxiety and paranoia that is created by this. So they start grinding in their teeth, not only in their sleep, but throughout. And unfortunately, this is what ends up happening. And what we're saying here is that there are consequences when people start using drugs. The consequences are psychological. The consequences are physical, as we have seen in this case. Okay, and again, you've got the lower IQ, the impairment, the dependency, and all of these things. Now, I'm sorry I am rushing through this, but this is, subhanAllah, this is really important. Okay, warning signs. How do I know if somebody is using? Okay, and please, as we've always said, please do not psychoanalyze your family members. We want to make sure that there isn't something else that is going on before we jump to conclusion and say, you must be using something here. Okay, but these are things just to be aware of. We want to look into the physical signs. Bloodshot eyes, all of a sudden they're just really red. Change in appetite or sleep pattern, sleeping too much, sleeping too little. Deterioration of grooming habits, it just hasn't taken a shower, doesn't change, and very poor brushing with their teeth and just taking care of themselves physically. Unexplained injuries, impaired coordination, they cannot catch the ball. Eye-hand coordination is very poor. You just throw the ball at them and they're unable to catch it. Unusual odor, okay? Psychological warning signs. So these were physical ones. Psychological warning signs. Sudden change in personality. Mood changes. Smoke marijuana. There is this irritation, anger, mood swings. Very happy, and then all of the sudden, just very angry. Irritability, okay? Unusual hyperactivity or agitation. Lack of motivation. Anxiety or paranoia for no apparent reason. I remember one time I had this client, young kid, beautiful kid. He was doing well at school, and then he went and he smoked marijuana, and it was really bad. And he developed what we call marijuana-induced paranoia. That damage was permanent, irreversible. He was so afraid of just doing the most mundane things. He said, I can't be around my mom, especially when we're in the kitchen. I'm afraid I'm going to kill my mom. I'm going to use the knife and kill my mom. And he just became paranoid. And I've been seeing him for years. And it was, unfortunately, this what we call marijuana-induced paranoia. Sometimes the paranoia is permanent, and sometimes the paranoia is temporary. Okay, behavioral warning signs. Skipping classes, getting in trouble in school, loss of interest, missing money or valuables around the house. You put the money there, but it's no longer there. You had prescription drugs, but now they are missing. Acting silent and withdrawn. All of a sudden, they just changed their relationships and frequently getting into trouble or using incense or perfume to hide something else. Okay, so we want to be aware and we want to pay attention to what is going on. So what we want to do is this. We want to make sure that we create a safe place. We really do not want to become this father, okay? We want to make sure that we create that safe space for our kids to come and talk to us. We want to be the father that is available, approachable, accessible. We want to make sure that we talk to our kids about these things. And please remember, that these talks are not just one long talk. I had the talk with my child about this. I spoke to my daughter, I spoke to my son about it, and that was it. No, these talks are continuous. They take place all the time in small dosages. Even when we think that our kids are not listening, please remember that. You know what? Kids may say, Dad, I know everything that was in this presentation. Man, I know more about this than what this guy is talking about. Nevertheless, that may be the case, but we still have that responsibility. I remember we had a client. She called me frantically one day and she said, please, Sheikh, I need to talk to you. It was after midnight, so what's going on? She said, I just called 911 and I think my son is having a seizure, but the paramedics just came to me and they said, your son is not having a seizure. Your son has overdosed on brownies. And she looked at them, she said, I didn't make any brownies today. And they just looked at each other and smiled. See, what happened is nowadays they make marijuana You can either smoke them or you can actually eat them, and you eat them in the form of literally brownies. He visited some of his friends and they invited him over for brownies. He knew what they were, but he ate and he was waiting for the impact of it, and he was not feeling it. Because remember, smoking marijuana is different than eating marijuana. Digestion takes a lot longer for you to feel the impact of it. So he kept eating and eating and eating, and then all of a sudden he ate a lot. So he started having these symptoms. And the paramedic said, look, I can take him to the hospital, but they will do nothing to him. He will probably sleep for the next 15 hours, and he will just wake up after 15 hours. So the paramedic said, we're not going to take him. They left him there. He did wake up after 15 hours. He was very apologetic. Mom, I am sorry. I didn't mean it. And you know what? I did this and I did that. And here's what's going on. Okay. So what we want to do is that, like I said, we want to make sure that we create this safe space for us to be able to speak to our kids, and that we become approachable and that we become available. So please talk regularly. A lot of mini conversations about these issues. Please, the idea is not to just talk, but also it is about listening. Okay. And what we want to do here is that we want to keep the conversation to be upbeat and positive, rather than just waiting to be critical of our teenager or our child for bad behavior. We want to make sure that they are heard, and we are not practicing what I call selective hearing, that we just say, but why did you do that? But why didn't you do anything about that? That may be said, but it cannot be the first thing that we want to say, especially when they are sharing with us. We want to take advantage of teachable moments to discuss drug use with our teens. You know, teachable moments don't necessarily have to be, you know, what specific. It could be while driving the car, it could be at school, it could be an event, it could be the news. You know, the other day I was just hearing that the grandchild of Elvis Presley, he committed suicide. I usually take these opportunities and I bring up suicide with the people. I said, look, here is somebody supposedly who is rich. You know, they come from a very rich family, very popular, very this and very that. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about suicide. Having good family habits, such as people eating together, such as people praying together. These are moments where you say, everybody just put your phones down. Let's just talk about this. And remember what I said about the way that Islam helps us in having these relationships, is that Islam is open to the idea that, look, there is some good that comes out of this. So if your child starts arguing with you about the benefits of marijuana, for example, you know, the fact that you're actually able to give and take, that just makes it an opportunity for a very intelligent, good conversation. And the point here is that, no, we know it's haram, but now imagine that you're actually open to the idea that you agree that there are some benefits to marijuana, which is unfortunately the case nowadays. Most of these kids are open to the usage of marijuana because they believe that it's all good. And we're saying is, look, some of it is good, but like the Quran said, some of it is good, but the evil in it outweighs the benefit that it may offer you. Nihat, I'm sorry, I spoke a lot today, so I apologize. But I believe that the information was really important, and that's why I just kept going. So my apology for the rush through this.
No problem. That was really good content, Sheikh. Thank you for sharing. Are you ready to go into the questions? We only have a couple today.
Okay, please.
Okay. So the first question is, there are a lot of CBD ointments that promise to alleviate arthritic pain. Are these considered halal and allowed for Muslims?
Yeah. So what happens is, number one, remember that in our deen, the idea of tadawi bil khamr, and that is using intoxicants as a form of medication. What the scholars have said, that it cannot be the intoxicant part that we are seeking, but rather it is something else that is there. So what they said that number one is when there is no other alternative, okay? And when it is prescribed by a doctor who knows what is really going on. Nowadays, CBD, you can just get it on your own, any place. You can actually have it mailed in for you. So these would be the conditions: the lack of alternative, that it was a doctor that gave it to you with a medical justification for why you are using it, and it is temporarily, and it is a specific area that you're using it for. It is for the arthritis pain, and not necessarily, because it is the mood altering part. In this case, it is the oil, so it is outside use for it. Okay, it's the same way that we would be using alcohol, for example, to clean our wounds. In that part, even though there's a debate amongst the scholar whether it is najis or not, impure or not, but Allahu alam, Allah knows best. That the most likely opinion, the most correct opinion, Allah knows best, is that it is not impure. It is haram, but it does not necessarily mean that it is impure. So in that form, then we would say it would be okay, inshallah, in the form of ointment, in the form of oil, but not the consumption part of it.
So even if a doctor doesn't prescribe it and you go to your local grocery store and they have an ointment with CBD oil in it, it's okay to use?
Yeah, remember, you're not consuming it, but rather it's an outside usage for it. At least that's what the question asked here. Yeah. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yes, you're correct. Then the next question is, I think you discussed this a little bit. Actually, you may have answered this, but I'm just going to ask this question. What advice would you give to a parent who has just found out that their child is using drugs?
Please remember, number one, do not give ultimatums. Please do not give ultimatums. I beg you, please do not give ultimatums. What does that mean? You either stop or you get out of here. Okay? That is not how we do it. Okay? So we want to reach out to our kids lovingly and caringly, that we want to keep them with us, because if we push them away, the likelihood is that they're going to even use more, because now they feel abandoned. Now they're the victims. Now my dad kicked me out. My mom kicked me out. So the tendency is that they will use a lot more in order to cope with the so-called victimization and abandonment that they are suffering from. Number two, please be ready for denial and resistance, because they want to say, oh no, it was just one time and it was this and it was that. Look, the idea is not that I want to be critical of you. Number three, we want you to be the liaison between your child and the professionals. So what happens if I find out that, my son smokes, my child smokes, my child drinks, my child uses drugs, okay? So remember what I said, the difference between use, misuse, and abuse, or become an addict, okay? And what we want to do is that we want to make sure that we have not gotten to the point of addiction. And the point of addiction is usually identified by the quadruple C's, the four C's: the loss of control, the constant craving, the compulsion to use, regardless of the consequences. When these four C's are present, we would say that this person is actually addicted to whatever it is that they are using. But at that point, they really, really need help. So we want to become aware. Where do I take them? Please do not be afraid of calling 911, especially if they are exhibiting behavior that makes them either a danger for themselves or a danger to those who are around them. We want to make sure that we become aware of the local help that is available to us, such as the rehab center. Sometimes you may want to detoxicate, meaning that they go in and they spend some time to get rid of all the stuff that is in their body, for example. Sometimes they may need to be admitted. Sometimes they may need to do daytime programs in and out, and that would include having a counselor, seeing a doctor, seeing a psychiatrist, doing group therapy. But what we want to do is that we want to make sure that we come from a place of love, as all parents would want to do. And then we would want to make sure that we get them all the help that we can. And unfortunately, I have seen many parents who have really, really struggled with their kids. because unfortunately, when you get to the point of addiction, I've seen parents who spend so much money on their kids. I took them to one rehab after another. And just to give you an idea, Nihathan, to all of our viewers there, so there is what we call the circle of addiction. And the circle of addiction usually begins with a thought, and then there is a fantasy, and then that fantasy grows to become a desire, and then that desire becomes a plan, and then that plan is executed, and then the person feels guilty. And they are determined that I am not going to do this again. And some time passes by. And then the next step is that they relapse. And then the circle starts again. They use, and then they desire, they fantasize, they have a plan, they execute the plan, and now they feel guilty. They are sober for some time, and then they relapse. And then unfortunately something else happens, and that is the circle becomes a little bit smaller. You use, and then the guilt goes away. And the person is no longer feeling guilty at this point. And now it just becomes that they have a plan, they execute, time passes by, they have a plan, they execute, time passes by, and so on. The best time for us to see a person is when they're feeling guilty, because at that point that their desire to be better is at its highest. They've seen what the drugs are doing to them and how it's messing up their relationship and what it's doing to their families and what have you. And hopefully we do not have the 4 C's at that point, because remember, it was the loss of control, the constant craving, the feeling compelled to do so, and then you disregard the consequences. And the minute people disregard the consequences, that's when we say, but you lost your job. You're no longer doing well at school. You got kicked out of the program. Your wife or husband is threatening of divorce. Your family doesn't want to be around you anymore. And these are some very, very serious consequences. But that's where, unfortunately, addiction comes in. And at that point, when it comes to the addiction, we don't really see the person as a loser. We see the person as somebody who is sick and they need help.
Thank you, Shaykh. I think those are all the questions that we have today, but I just wanted to thank you again for bringing up this discussion. I think it's something that our community doesn't really talk about in public. So thank you, Shaykh, for
No problem. And remember, we said that we may not want to talk about it in public, but we recite it in the Quran, and there will be no use of us reciting it in the Quran, but not wanting to say anything about it. And like I said, I love how they say that the Quran is a very brave book that is read by a lot of cowards. And we hope that we're not the cowards, inshallah.
So next week, I believe our topic is about schizophrenia and differentiating that from the influence of jinns. So that should be very interesting for a lot of people.
Inshallah, Ya Rabbil Alamin. Yes, and we do look forward to it, inshallah.
And then just to remind everyone, Sheikh Yassir is still taking consultations on Mondays from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. You can find the link on the MCRC website, the MAPS website, and then the MAPS MCRC Clinic's Facebook page as well. And then in the weekly newsletter that MAPS sends out.
Thanks.
That, I think, oh wait, one more question just came in. Do you want to answer it? I know
sure, go ahead.
Okay. What if one finds out that you are being drugged in small doses without your knowledge?
Oh, that's a big one. So remember, if somebody is an adult, you may not do that to them unless that was okay by the court. Okay. Unfortunately, we cannot. Many times, parents, loved ones, they really want to help their loved ones around them, and they need to be medicated, and we think that we can slip the medication in their drinks, and even though we may justify this to be for their own good, but we want them to be part of that for their own good as well. So and I'm assuming that the drugs here are good drugs for the benefit of the individual, even though it does not indicate. If these were bad drugs where a person is drugged to be taken advantage of, what took place is illegal, please make sure that you bring this to the attention of the authorities. make sure that that person is arrested, make sure that that person faces justice and consequences for what they have done. And that is, again, part of, going to these parties, like we said earlier about the risk factors. A good number of people, I actually had a client, she said that somebody slipped something in her drink when she went to a party, and unfortunately she was taken advantage of when she was drugged. And what took place is illegal, and it is absolutely horrific and sad. And that is why, again, we want to be careful as to the kind of people that we hang around with. And these are not the type of people that would take advantage of us by slipping these things into our drinks. But please remember that this is illegal. Unless a person is completely incapacitated, that they are really unable to take care of themselves, then there are legal ways of applying to court, saying that this person is unable to take care of themselves, and they can actually become a ward of the court. You have the right to call in. It's referred to as a 5150. If a person is either a danger to themselves or they are a danger to those who are around them, you can actually call the police, and that person can be held against their will for up to 72 hours. And it can be extended after evaluation. We do this sometimes with some of our loved ones who are going through some extreme mental breakdown, where a person may see that they can no longer take care of themselves. So we want to make sure that even when we help, we want to do it ethically and we want to do it legally.
Thank you, Sheikh. I think that's all. And we're 10 minutes over.
Okay.
So I think we can close out now. And then inshallah, we can resume next week for our talk on schizophrenia.
Inshallah. And as always, it was good being with you, and thank you for facilitating.
Of course. Thank you, Sheikh, for being here. Thank
All
you,
right,
everyone.
you take care.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Take care.